I was hoping to maybe make a little case around the world at work and why leadership is important. Talk a little bit about the journey that we've had at Luck Companies and Luck Stone Corporation. And then a short piece about if you're interested in learning more or how you might, in your organizations, take the next steps with values-based leadership. So this idea of engagement in your employees, when you think about engagement, how ready are your employees and you yourselves ready to do work and do good work, give discretionary effort in your workplace? Anyone want to throw a guess out in the U.S. How many of us are engaged at work? 38. Anybody else? It's a low number.
24.
Wow, well you guys are pretty good because it is a sad statistic. And this is based on data from the Hay Group, and I'll give you a little more information about the Hay Group in a few minutes. But at least according to this study, 20% of us are engaged at work. So when you think about discretionary effort, when you think about customer service, there's a lot that's being left on the table here with 20% engagement. This is a tough one. This one, think about trust and integrity. How many of us don't trust our leaders? And you think about what's going on outside the workplace in Washington and around the world. Any idea on the percentage of us that don't trust our leaders?
90.
Somebody back there has seen my presentation. And it's really sad. To me, this is a horribly sad statistic. 80% of us don't trust our leaders. So we have a picture of the workplace beginning to form. Low engagement, low trust. And then one more, this is even getting a little closer to home because I'm sure some of us in here are bosses. What percentage of us don't trust our bosses to tell the truth? That's pretty fundamental. Any guesses?
75.
88% don't trust their bosses. So again, low engagement, low trust. There's a lot being left on the table in the workforce in the United States and around the world. And then finally, and we're not painting a very good picture so far around this question, but how many of us are hopeful about the future?
55%.
Love the optimism. Anyone else? We have 55%. 18? 34%. So we're a little more hopeful than we are engaged, but not much. So this is the world at work, at least according to these statistics, and you can argue the numbers, maybe, or the details of the numbers, but unfortunately I think the trend is accurate. We have low engagement, we have low trust, and we have low hope in the workforce in the U.S. and I think around the world. So what's the impact of that? What do you all think? If you believe these numbers, or believe them at least to be directionally correct, then what do you think the impact of this is in the workplace and on productivity and efficiency? Low. Or high impact and low productivity? So here's a little bit of the impact. The information on the left is basically a restatement of the data we just went through. And then on the right are some cost numbers associated with that. 500 to 750 billion per year in lost productivity. I imagine you could also argue that number, and potentially it's even higher when you think about 20% engagement, 80% don't trust.
For-profit companies?
These are, yes, for-profit companies. And again, this is data, all of the data that I've shared so far is from the Hay Group, and it's 500 global companies and 50,000 surveys. So this is international data, and it's not a small data set. We actually work with Hay Group. We're probably one of the smaller companies that work with Hay, but Hay works with Fortune 500 companies and support them on leadership development, assessments. They do climate studies. So this is a broad range of data from around the world. There's an interesting note there in the middle of the slide on the left. Associates leave their boss, not the company. That speaks to that low trust, also speaks to the importance of leadership. And then over on the right, on the cost side, which is probably a little more refined data, $2 trillion cost over the next few years in recruitment and training cost. So you talk about low engagement, you talk about low trust. Folks, people aren't going to stay in those environments for long, they're going to move. So you have that reality in the workplace, and then you have the reality of the demographics with Generation Y, which I find hard to believe will have an average of 20 jobs during their careers. So you have a demographic shift towards less loyalty and more job shifting, And then you have a workplace that doesn't promote loyalty and longevity, and you end up with huge cost in recruiting, training, retention. So to me, pretty frightening numbers. And there's a case here, again, whether you believe the details of the numbers or not, there's a case here that something needs to change because we're leaving a lot on the table with respect to efficiency and effectiveness and profitability in the workplace. Any thoughts or questions about this before we take another step forward here? Does anyone want to dispute this or believe that this is not true or overstated or in some way misrepresentative of where we are? Great. Engagement is, one way to define it is an employee's willingness to give discretionary effort. It is that they have the clarity that they need to do their job and the tools and resources to get the job done. And the extent that those two things are present, then they not only can do the job that they're assigned to do, but also in many cases will give discretionary effort. All right, I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk. I think many of you know about Luckstone, but anybody can guess what this is a picture of? And I didn't take it this morning, by the way. This is our Boscobel Quarry in Goochland County, I'm guessing in the late 20s, early 30s. So we are Luck companies, and we have several businesses, although we are divesting of a couple businesses, and I can talk about that offline. But our primary business is Luckstone, which is a crushed stone quarry. We operate quarries in the Mid-Atlantic from basically Northern Virginia to North Carolina. But one of the number of things that I think is special about Luck is that we are a family-owned, family-run business. There are not many of those left, unfortunately. We've seen a lot of those leave Richmond over the last few years. We were founded in 1923, but actually the Luck family has legacy businesses that date back before that. Charles S. Luck & Son Contracting Company, and then also the Clover Dairy. And there may be a few of you in the room that remember the Clover Room, which was an ice cream shop, and they brought the milk straight from the dairy to the ice cream shop. I understand that was a really popular place, and I would like to see us reopen the Clover Room. There are no plans for that, but if it ever happens, you can give me credit for it. But we are, so Charles S. Luck Jr. started the company in 1923. And we had our first quarry, Sunnyside Granite Company, which was behind Windsor Farms. It's no longer there. When they built the downtown expressway and excavated all that dirt, they filled in the quarry. So we have no more ownership interest in that. This was our second quarry, Boscobel, out in Goochland County. We now have 17 crushed stone operations and 6 distribution yards. And although we are still in a fairly compact geographic area here in the Mid-Atlantic, we are about the 12th largest aggregate producer in the United States and the largest privately held family-run company. So we've grown from fairly modest start here in downtown Richmond to being a significant regional and national player in crushed stone and building materials. As we grew, well, particularly from about 1985 to 2000, we had tremendous growth in our organization. And that's a blessing and a curse. Prior to that tremendous growth, Charles Luck Jr. and then Charles S. Luck III, who's currently our chairman, could get out to every location. They knew every associate by name, probably knew their spouses' names, their children's names. And so the culture of the company was the culture of the Luck family. But we went through tremendous growth. Charles S. Luck IV took over as CEO in the mid-90s. And he began to realize that as we had doubled, tripled, quadrupled in size, that we had lost a little bit of that culture. New people, new leaders. And he was becoming increasingly concerned about our organization. We were beginning to look a little bit like those statistics I showed you on the front end. Very different than what we'd been up to that point. And so he paused and said, and by the way, we were making tons of money. Profitability was not an issue at that point, but culture was an issue. And as a matter of fact, I think, and he began to look at his leadership team and be very concerned about the relationships, the conversation, and what was going on. And I think, unfortunately, a few of those conversations might have looked something like this at the water cooler after a big meeting.
I'm about to whip somebody's ass. Oh, I'm about to whip somebody's ass. Oh, if you don't leave me alone, you're gonna have to send me home, 'cause I'm about to whip somebody's ass.
And that's not what a family-held business with a strong culture felt like to Charlie Luck, and it's not what it felt like to our company. So, the year, late 90s, early 2000s, Charlie said something's got to change. By the way, this is a picture of our Leesburg plant in Northern Virginia, so a little bit different look. So he got with our former VP of HR, Jay Kaufman, and they went out into the world to look at what could they do to restore. They knew we had to evolve as an organization, but what could we do to break the trend to keep us from looking like all the companies that I described at the beginning of the presentation? And they found a gentleman down in San Antonio, Texas, Guy Klumpner with Holt Development Services. What is an interesting coincidence about Holt is that they are affiliated with a Caterpillar dealership, Holt Caterpillar down in San Antonio, and we're a big Caterpillar customer. We don't deal with Holt, we deal with the Caterpillar dealers here in Richmond, but there was some alignment there around the type of work that they did and the type of work that we did. And so Guy came up to Richmond. He's a sawed-off Texan with a big belt buckle and cowboy boots, rolls into our office in Richmond with our leadership team at that time that was looking a lot like those ducks, many of them. And he listened to a little bit about what was going on in the company. He said, okay, I want you all to take out a piece of paper, get your pens out, write down everything that's wrong with the company or needs to change. Now, I was not on the leadership team at that point, but apparently they all feverishly, they took the challenge and they started writing things down and flipping over pages and writing things down. And after a couple minutes, he said, stop. The guy said, stop. And he asked, how many of you all wrote down yourself? You need to change. And I think a number of them apparently looked at him and said, who's this sawed-off Texan coming up here to Richmond and tell me I need to change? And he said, well, if you didn't write down yourself, we're not going to be able to make this thing work, because in order to change a company, in order to change a culture, that starts with the leadership team, and it starts right here in this room. And then he went on to say that and I think he was addressing this to Charlie, quite frankly, he said, and if you all are going to take this really seriously and you want to change your culture, half of you, talking about the leadership team, won't be here in 5 years. And then, of course, the half that probably wasn't there in 5 years said, who's this sawed-off Texan coming up here and, telling me I'm not going to have a job. But we did take it seriously. Half of our leadership team wasn't with us in 5 years. Not that they're bad people. They've gone on to great success. They just weren't right for our company. And so Guy was on to this. This is from Simon Sinek in his book this past year. I always say eaters lead last, but it's leaders eat last. But this is one of the more important points of our conversation this morning, and it's what Guy was hitting on in 2000 for us. So go the leaders, so go the culture, so go the culture, so goes the company. And we were struggling with culture, we were struggling with leadership in 2000, and the company was going to head that way as well if we didn't do something about it. So what we started with was developing a set of organizational values. We also started with having our leadership team look at themselves, understand who they were, what they valued, what their styles were, how they communicated to each other, and we began to sort of establish a code for Luck companies. And we wrapped that code around this idea of values-based leadership. But the first step for us was establishing that set of organizational values. Commitment, creativity, integrity, and leadership are the values that we have. We established those in 2000 and 2001. They're still the values that we live by today.